Welcome to the first chapter of the Blender Basic Training course. In this chapter, we'll talk about the default navigation and interface of Blender. Let us start. After opening Blender, you will be greeted by a splash screen. Click outside it to start working. The first thing you're going to see is the 3D view. It is your primary work area. You will spend most of your time modeling and animating objects here. You select objects in the 3D view by right-clicking. Let's talk about navigating the 3D view. To rotate or tumble the camera, click and drag the middle mouse button. To pan, press Shift on your keyboard and click and drag the middle mouse button. You can zoom by scrolling the mouse wheel or by pressing Ctrl and clicking and dragging the middle mouse button up or down. Next, the camera controls. Blender's camera controls rely solely on your keyboard's numpad. If you're using a laptop and your keyboard doesn't have a numpad, Blender has a user setting that allows you to use the keyboard's regular numeral keys. To do this, go to the File, User Preferences, Input tab, and check the Emulate Numpad checkbox. Pressing 0 on the numpad toggles the camera view. This is your render view, which we will cover in the later chapters. The dot will zoom into an object that is currently selected. Press 7 for the top view, 1 for front view, and 3 for the right view. You can access the opposite camera views by pressing Ctrl and the corresponding shortcut for each of the views. So that's Ctrl+7 for the bottom view, Ctrl+1 for the back view, and Ctrl+3 for the left view. The numpad 5 switches between the default perspective view and the orthographic view. This is displayed on the 3D view's upper left corner. The orthographic view is best used when viewing from a 2D angle such as the top, front, or side. You can also display the 4 default camera views simultaneously by pressing Ctrl+Alt+Q. Numpad keys 2, 4, 6, and 8 rotates the camera view in increments. Next, the default interface of Blender. The user interface is divided by panels. This is the 3D view panel, your main work area. The timeline panel for playback and animation. The properties panel, which is one of the most important panels in Blender. Here you can set the parameters of just about every setting in your scene. It is composed of different tabs that you can scroll by clicking and dragging the middle mouse button through it. The outliner panel. Here you have an overview of everything you have in your scene. The info panel with the menu bar and the screen layout button for quickly changing the user interface. For example, we need to work on an animation. Click on the button and choose Animation. The user interface will change to suit your needs. You can also create and save your own interface here, but we'll go to that later. Let's go back to the default view for now. Each panel has a header at the top or the bottom. The header has a button at the leftmost part that lets you decide the panel type. For example, we need to edit UV. Simply click the button and choose UV Editor. You can do this with every panel. An essential shortcut to keep in mind is Shift plus Spacebar. This toggles the panel where the mouse pointer currently is to full screen. In your 3D view panel, you can also have the tool shelf. The tool shelf displays the most commonly used transformation controls and object tools. You can toggle it on and off in the view menu of the 3D view or by simply hitting T on your keyboard. Apart from the tool shelf, the 3D view also contains the Properties menu. It is hidden by default. You can access it in the View menu or by its shortcut N. It displays several important information such as the transform values. This should not be confused with the Properties panel. Keep in mind that Blender's entire interface is fully customizable. You can tweak the layout to whatever setup you prefer. Notice the diagonal lines in the upper right or bottom left corner of the panels. Your mouse cursor will turn into a cross when you hover. When you left-click and drag to an area, it becomes a new panel. You can then choose the panel type to your liking. To remove a newly created panel, click and drag on the same diagonal lines over an area of an adjacent panel until you see that area darken and an arrow symbol appears. You can duplicate panels to a new window by pressing Shift and then clicking and dragging on the diagonal lines. You can save your custom layout in the Info panel. Click the Add button and give it a name. Proceed to modify the interface. You can now go back to this interface in the Choose Screen Layout button. To delete a layout, select it and click on the X button. Next, we will discuss the user preferences. To access it, go to the menu bar of the Info panel, click File and User Preferences, or by its shortcut, Ctrl+Alt+U. You can also access the user preferences by creating a new panel and selecting it from the Panel Type button. In the Input tab, you can do a lot of modifications to Blender's default keyboard shortcuts and mouse clicks. You can change the way you select objects if Blender's default right-click is uncomfortable to you. You can also change Blender's default camera control by navigating to 3D View, 3D View Global, Rotate View. For example, I want it to be like 3ds Max. I will simply add a keyboard modifier, which is Alt, then continue to the Move View and remove the default modifier assigned to it. In the Themes tab, you can choose from a list of presets to change the overall look of Blender, or you can manually assign a color to each and every function. I strongly suggest that you explore and experiment with Blender's interface and customization options and find a setup that best suits your working style. And if you make accidental changes, you can always revert to the default settings by going to File, Load Factory Settings. Lastly, remember that every time you make a change, always save the user settings by going to File, Save User Settings, or hitting Ctrl+U. This way, every time you start Blender or a new scene, Blender will remember it. This sums up Part 1 Navigation and Interface. Thank you and see you in the next chapter!